Here we are at example 5 from the 0.2 set of notes. We're asked to sketch the graph of this particular function. Now we notice that it is in fact a rational function where we have the degrees on top the same as the one on the bottom. And as a result, when we're discussing our horizontal asymptote, it follows that scenario 2 where they're identical, those degrees. So as a result, all we're going to do is just divide those leading coefficients. So ultimately, our horizontal asymptote will come out to be y is equal to 2 divided by 1, which is just 2. Now when we're talking about our VA, it pretty much just still follows that same scenario where you just set the bottom not equal to 0. So we have this x minus 2 not equal to 0, and then just solve for that. So if we just add 2 to both sides, we end up with x is not equal to positive 2 for that VA. Now if we go ahead and graph these, we have 2 as our horizontal asymptote, and then x equals, or is not equal to 2 as our VA. Now let's go ahead and create a table where we can then throw in some x's and y's and see what they come out to be. So again, we want to create some values that are to the left of our VA. So ones I would probably go with would be like, you know, -1, 0, and 1. And then some to the right would include 3, 4, and 5. Again, we'll switch up the color too. So 3, 4, and 5. Now if we go ahead and plug in 0 or -1, we would end up with -2 minus 3, that's -5 on top, over -1 minus 2, that just comes out to be -3. So ultimately, that just comes out to be positive 5/3. If we try plugging in 0, then we end up with 0 minus 3, that's -3, divided by 0 minus 2 is -2. So ultimately, we end up with positive 3/2. When we throw 1 in, we end up with 2 minus 3, that's -1, over 1 minus 2, that's -1. So ultimately that'll just come out to be positive 1. Now going ahead on the right side, when we plug in those values like 3, we end up with 6 minus 3 is 3, over 3 minus 2 is just 1, so we ultimately get just 3. When we try 4, we end up with 8 minus 3, that's 5, over 4 minus 2 is 2, so ultimately it's just 5/2. When we throw in 5, we get 10 minus 3, which is 7, over 5 minus 2 gives us 3. Alright. So, and just kind of converting these, because we see a lot of fractions, let's go ahead and actually change those to more just like numbers, more proper fractions. That way it's a little easier for us to graph. So this will end up just coming out to be 1 2/3. This guy will just come out to be 1 1/2. 1, 3, that's fine. For the blue ones, 5/2 is the same thing as saying 2 1/2. And then this one would just come out to be 2 1/3. So again, the whole reason for that is now we can actually graph things a little bit easier. Now let's go ahead and plot those points. We have -1, 1 2/3. So -1, 1 2/3. That would be right here. At 0, we have 1 and 1/2, just kind of just in between a little bit more. At 1, we have 1. And again, I'm just going to graph things in black. So at 3, we have 3. On our right side. At 4, we have 2 and 1/2. And then at 5, we have 2 and 1/3. So kind of getting closer to that horizontal asymptote of 2. So again, this was on the left. These were the ones on the right. Now if we go ahead and connect the dots, they are hugging these asymptotes. Likewise on the right side. They're not actually going to cross, they're just going to be hugging them. Now when we're finally getting to the domain and range, the domain for this is pretty much just going out toward negative infinity, as you can see. And then it eventually approaches that vertical asymptote of 2. Won't quite cross 2. That's why we have that parenthesis. Union picks up on the right side of 2 and goes outward toward infinity. So this would include all real numbers except where x is not equal to 2. For our range, pretty much follows that same scenario, but just with the y values. This is going down toward negative infinity. It's approaching that horizontal asymptote of 2. And then it will resume just above 2 and go upward toward infinity. So actually our domain and range for this one will actually come out to be the exact same thing. For this one, that would actually include where y is not equal to 2. So that would include, yeah, that would be our range. So that again is example 5 from the 0.2 set of notes.